Hello everyone, welcome back to my page. In today's video, we want to go ahead and talk about a bit more in depth how I water and how I fertilize. Now, these two things are directly dependent on the season, and what I mean by that is the frequency, because we'll talk about the dosages further into the video. So, jumping back into what I mean by the seasons, here in the Northern Hemisphere, or the States, I do grow my orchids in my apartment in DC. Our grow season stems from spring to summer. Now, courtesy of another YouTuber, I believe Brad's Greenhouse, I've learned to sort of note these changes around the times of Valentine's Day to Halloween. Now, during this time, during this spring to summer grow season, you want to increase your watering only because the dry times are going to be quicker. This warm weather is going to mean your pot is going to dry out a bit quicker. In my environment, that's about 2 times a week or about every 3 to 4 days I find myself watering. I water just with my tap water from the faucet. Now, with regard to fertilizing, again, I water about every 4 days, so my fertilizing comes down to the different types of orchids. So my Paphiopedilums, are fertilized about every 3rd watering, which is about every 12 days within that 4-day cycle. And my Phalaenopsis, are fertilized about every other watering, every 2nd watering. So that's about every 8 days within that 4-day span. Now here's where it gets pretty interesting. So during the grow season, the orchids absolutely love nitrogen. So I give them a high nitrogen fertilizer once a month in the beginning. The fertilizer I do use, no endorsement, is Better Grow Orchid Plus because it does have a higher concentration of nitrogen available to the orchid. Now, the specific months that I do use this is February to July. And again, that's about once a month in the beginning. All other times the plants are fertilized in those months, I'm just using an MSU tap water fertilizer basically all year round. So again, just in the beginning of the months, I'm dosing my plants with a high nitrogen fertilizer, and then basically in between those high nitrogen dosages, I'm providing the MSU tap water fertilizer, which does have a bit of a higher concentration of nitrogen, but not as much as the Better Grow, so it makes the MSU a bit more balanced for the orchid. Now, before we go into what we do in the slow/bloom season, I just wanted to talk about the dosages and what goes into my pot. So the dosages and amounts that I'm using don't change, and they're dependent on my pot size. So first off, all my pots have an MSU slow release fertilizer in there at a dose of 1/8 of a teaspoon. Now, this fertilizer I only put in my pots every 6 months, so in January and then again in June or July, and it only works when the temperature is warm, so I don't have to worry about a sense of over fertilizing really. And in general, I do also fertilize, again with the dissolvable fertilizers that I mentioned, at 1/8 of a teaspoon for 4-inch pots and smaller, and at 1/4 of a teaspoon at 4.5-inch and bigger pots. And those teaspoons are per gallon. So basically, the plants do get a little more fertilizer than what I'm giving, especially in the grow season, because of the slow release fertilizers that are already available in the pot. Now, moving along to a technique that I've learned, I do dissolve my fertilizers in warm water the night before because it completely dissolves the fertilizer so that there's nothing left that can burn the roots or nothing left that sits on the media too long, so that when I'm flushing the pot, there's a lot of flushing I have to do. So I'm just basically the night before filling my watering can with lukewarm water and stirring it with the amount of fertilizers that I need. I also have jugs that I do this with on the day before fertilizing so that I have enough to dispense on a watering day so that it's not taking me forever. But I basically do this the night before just to ensure that there's no root burn, and it seems to work pretty well. Next, I wanted to state that I do use tap water when I water. During the grow season, when I can remember, I use about 1/8 of a teaspoon of CalMag and or seaweed. I don't use seaweed if any of my plants are in bud, if they have bud, because in my experience, they'll come out with deformed blooms. But I learned this technique from Orchid Whisperer, who learned it from a gentleman. I can't think of his name because he hasn't been online for very long, but Orchid Whisperer has great videos on how to use CalMag, which provides calcium and magnesium, as well as seaweed, which is a supplement to fertilizing. Moving along, I don't check pH, but I did invest in a zero water filter, which comes with a ppm meter, which measures the parts per million. And I found out that my tap water has about 170 parts per million. When I let it sit overnight, it goes down to about 130, so that's why I use it. I really only use the zero filter for flushing. And for flushing, during grow season, I do flush my paths twice a month and once a month in the slow season, and the phals are flushed once a month all year round. So let's go ahead and just talk a little about how I fertilize in the slow/the bloom season, which is basically the opposite. So it's the same sort of idea, but now we're going from fall to winter here in the Northern Hemisphere. So we're switching it from Halloween to Valentine's Day. So during this time, we want to decrease the watering because the plants, the pots, are drying a lot slower. Now, you'll have to learn this in your environment. And here in my environment, for example, that twice a week now goes down to once a week. And I put that down to every 8 days just to give an extra day for my pots to dry. So I actually don't change the fertilizing frequency because the watering frequency has already changed to every 8 days. So for example, my paths that get fertilized every third watering still get fertilized every third watering, but now it's about every 21 to every 24 days. Get where I'm going with that? And the phals are still fertilized every other watering, but now that's every 14 to 16 days. And the reason why I have that little 2-day gap or so is because during the transition, I'm moving that. So eventually it does become the higher number permanently, but during that transition phase, you kind of have to figure it out because sometimes the temperatures change fast, sometimes they change slow. But the other point that I want to mention, during the slow/bloom season, when the temperatures are dropping, the plants enjoy high phosphorus. So now I'm switching to the Better Grow, Better Bloom orchid fertilizer once a month in the beginning. So now that becomes every August to January, every once a month from August to January. So something tricky happens between the paths and the phals here because I'm only fertilizing once a month in the beginning with this fertilizer. The paths only get fertilized about once a month, if you notice, because the frequency had changed every third watering to every 21 to 24 days. So they no longer receive the MSU fertilizer. They're just receiving this as well as, the waterings with the CalMag and the seaweed. But the phals are begin to get fertilized every twice a month, so they do get 1 and 1. Confused yet? I swear it's simple, but It's something that you just kind of learn with your plants, and I've done experiments with the first plant I purchased, my test orchid, which I do mention in a couple of other videos. And really the only thing that changes is the flushing. During this time, everyone gets flushed once a month, but everything else remains the same. The dosage amounts, dissolving before night, using tap water to water, and the zero water to flush. Everything basically stays the same. And with that, I leave you all, of course, as usual, my social media handles. If you'd like to follow my orchid journey on Facebook or on Instagram, I do post the journey a bit more just in a barrage of photos rather than motion pictures. So I'll see you all in the next video. Have a wonderful day.